Hello, thank you for tuning into the Natural Health Rising podcast. My name is Rachel Smith. I am a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and I've helped hundreds of people naturally reverse symptoms of autoimmune diseases and other health challenges, from digestive issues to hormone imbalances. And in these weekly episodes, you're going to learn from myself and top health experts from around the world about functional medicine and holistic health tips to help you rise to your healthiest, happiest self. Welcome to the Natural Health Rising podcast. This episode was really fun. It was very conversational between myself and Dr. Jacoby. And at a certain point, we get into talking a little bit about how I'm actually in Spain right now living, and I'm traveling all over the world for the next year, and how I've lived in different countries. And we started to talk about the differences in food and health and the people and those types of things. And yeah, I've only been in Spain for, I think it's been almost a full week, and I do already notice a lot of differences. And we talked about more after we stopped recording. But for example, I went to eat today for lunch, and I got this beautiful seafood dish. There's a lot of fresh seafood here. I'm actually staying on an island right now, so lots of seafood. And then a few days ago, also had an amazing seafood dish. And what I noticed immediately was that the oil, everything tasted like either butter or olive oil. And everything was so delicious and fresh and tasted like real whole foods. And it just tasted different than in the United States. In the US, pretty much every restaurant, maybe like 99% of restaurants, 95% of restaurants are going to be using seed oils, which are so inflammatory to the body. And yeah, so far in Spain, at least, I haven't felt or tasted seed oils. And I'm definitely loving it. I'm loving the fresh food, but it is just goes to show, how America is really keeping us sick in America, even just with the seed oils alone. And then even, the way that we treat the animals and how conventional farm-raised animals create more inflammatory meats. And I could go on and on and on about this stuff. We talk a little bit about that in the show, but really today is actually more about sugar. And we talk all about sugar and all of the different types of sugar, what's good, what's bad, what should be avoided, how to read labels on packages, the root causes of all diseases. And of course, I'm kind of alluding to sugar as a being part of that whole picture. And we talk about peripheral neuropathy and what that is, and lots of different chronic illnesses, neurodegenerative diseases on this episode. So it is a really interesting conversation. And I would say most of the stuff we talk about on this episode today has not been discussed on the podcast yet, at least in the context that Dr. Jacoby explains it in. So I really enjoyed myself. We could have been talking for hours and hours today. So without further ado, I'm going to read his introduction, and we'll get into the episode. And before I actually do that, I want to really quickly read a Apple podcast review. And this one is from S. Cahill 123, who said, "This podcast is a great blend of education and personal stories. The wellness wisdom being shared is top notch, and Rachel is an authentic voice helping to share the important message of holistic health. Can't wait to listen to the next episode." Thank you so much. If you are listening to this podcast and you've been listening and you love it, then please just hit pause, go ahead, leave a quick review, because it really helps boost the podcast so that more people can hear this and we can get this information out to as many people as possible. Because this stuff, holistic health has been censored for so long and is continuously being censored. And if we're able to boost these podcasts where we're talking about the truth of health, then more people are going to hear that. And I'm also really quickly going to read a client testimonial. And I'll go ahead and read Lillian Williams today. So Lillian said, before meeting Rachel, I was struggling with a new diagnosis of hypothyroidism, debilitating fatigue, muscle weakness, joint pain, low energy, brain fog, constant bloated feelings, difficulty sleeping, and frequent headaches. I couldn't play volleyball for an hour without waking up the next day feeling like I had been hit by a truck. I'd been dealing with these concerns for about a year, despite being put on medication for my thyroid and despite having quote unquote normal labs. I tried to deal with the pain by taking ibuprofen when I would feel sore or have a headache, and attempted a gluten-free and dairy-free diet briefly, but it wasn't making enough of a change. Since meeting with Rachel and starting on this health journey, I feel like I've had a complete turnaround. Once starting her protocols, changing my diet, and working through lifestyle changes, I started waking up before my alarm, having energy to get through the day, and do other things that inspired me and made me happy, and could exercise and get things done around the house. I haven't had headaches anymore. My muscles feel stronger, and I get great sleep and wake up feeling well. I'm so thankful for Rachel and guiding me through this journey, for helping make it doable and realistic for me, and for having such an awesome app and plan that really sets you up for success. There is no way I could have done this without her, but also without all of the things she puts in place to make this easier and more realistic. She listened, heard me, and changed my life. I now have the tools and strategies to continue living a healthy life and know that I'm taking the best care of me that I can. I promise you will not regret working with Rachel. She is incredible, and I feel confident that she can change anyone's life who is willing. It wasn't always easy, but it was well worth it. So again, that was from Lillian Williams from Tennessee. Thank you, Lillian, for the incredible testimonial. And again, just sharing this stuff on this podcast so that you can hear more stories about how functional medicine and holistic health really does work. Okay, so I lied before when I said I was going to do the intro. Now I will do his intro. So without further ado now, Dr. Richard Jacoby, DPM, received his postgraduate education at Villanova University in Pennsylvania and attended medical school at Pennsylvania College of Podiatric Medicine. Dr. Jacoby has won the Phoenix Magazine Top Docs Award on 4 different occasions, 2003, 2005, 2008, and 2010. And he is the co-author of the book Sugar Crush: How to Reduce Inflammation, Reverse Nerve Damage, and Reclaim Good Health. Dr. Jacoby is a past president of the Arizona Podiatry Association, as well as the Association of Extremity Nerve Surgeons. He specializes in the treatment of peripheral neuropathy and has been in practice since 1970. Enjoy this episode with myself and Dr. Jacoby. All right, welcome to the show, Dr. Jacoby. How are you?
I'm great. I'm in Arizona. You're not. You're in Spain.
Yes. Yes, I am. So happy to have you on the show. And as I said in your intro, you specialize in peripheral neuropathy, but most people probably don't know what that is. I get, unless somebody is suffering with that themselves. I would love to start off by having you explain to the listeners, what is peripheral neuropathy, and then maybe why people could get this.
Well, let's explain the name itself. Peripheral means anything outside the spine, and the word neuropathy means a problem with the nerve. And that's really all it really means. Is a very descriptive term. My training is in peripheral nerve surgery, so that's what I do. I was trained by Dr. Lee Dellon out of Johns Hopkins. He's the world's leading authority on this subject. And I had been practicing for quite some time. I knew everything until I met him. Then I realized I knew nothing. And he's written the two textbooks on diabetic polyneuropathy, and I'll try to explain these words as I go. Diabetic, peripheral neuropathy, and we say poly because we're saying multiple nerves of the lower extremity. And that's what most people think of diabetes as affecting nerves, amputations, gangrene, things of that nature. When I studied with him, he introduced me a concept of decompressing nerves of the lower extremity, which was based on his research back in the 80s at NIH, National Institute of Health, and Johns Hopkins, and also the Curtis Hand Center in Baltimore. So I got to give you a little background on Dr. Dellon because he is the world's leading authority. He taught me. So in those days, it was felt that all these diseases were separate and distinct. They have labels like Alzheimer's, autism, peripheral neuropathy, carpal tunnel, ulnar tunnel, MS. It goes on and on and on. Well, after I trained with him, and I'll tell you what his theory is and how he got to it, was in the 80s, he had a patient who he had operated on for carpal tunnel, which was fairly rare in 1980s. And then she also said, could you fix my elbow? And he did. That's the ulnar tunnel, the ulnar nerve. And after she got better from that, she said to Dr. Dellon, why don't you fix my legs? And he said, well, no, that's a different disease. And he said, maybe it isn't. Went to the laboratory, phenomenal little experiments on rats and primates, et cetera, I won't go into it, but they're amazing studies. So then he said, well, let's try that. And we found the tunnels in the lower extremity. We'll operate on you, which he did. She got her feeling back. I met him around 2000, and he was giving a lecture, and he said to me, why do you doctors cut the nerve out in the foot, which is called Morton's neuroma, the very common condition? I said, well, that's what we were taught to do. Come down to Johns Hopkins. I will teach you a new way of looking at things, but first you have to read my textbook. That's a daunting task. I did. I read it. I drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak. And he taught me how to do the surgery. I had established the wound care center. Well, since you're from Arizona in the Scottsdale area, you know where the Scottsdale Healthcare, which is now called Scottsdale Honor Health. That's the hospital. I was at the original hospital downtown Scottsdale, very close to this place where I'm podcasting with you right now. And I started the wound care center maybe 35 years ago, then ran into Dr. Dellon, and I instituted his procedure concept for my patients at that hospital. And the first patient I had, let's call her Janice. And Janice was in a wheelchair. She had no feelings. She had episodes of gangrene probably for the last 10 years. And I took care of her and took a toe off here and a piece of flesh there, et cetera. That's what we did at the wound care center. I said, Janice, there's a new procedure to me. Would you like to try it? Because we're really running out of time. So I did the surgery. She did well, but I lost her to follow up. About 3 months later, she comes into the clinic at that hospital at Osborne and Scottsdale Road. You know where it is. And she's walking. And I'm like, wait a minute, you were in a wheelchair. Now you're walking. Not only have your sensation back, you have your muscle power back. But she had a cast on her arm. And I'm really confused at this site. She's walking towards me with a cast on her arm. She comes up and said, I want to thank you for saving my leg. I said, but why do you have a cast on your arm? She's, well, you know, I couldn't walk. I was in a wheelchair. My husband took me to Hawaii. I was climbing on the lava rocks. I slipped, I fell, I broke my arm, and I want to thank you. That's an unbelievable. That was my first case. Now it's almost a quarter century ago, which is shocking. This procedure works, and I've done thousands of cases, but it's not accepted because there's not a what we call a class 1 study, meaning comparing against a sham surgery, meaning you have a surgery that's, you make an incision, but you don't do the surgery. It's randomized. Well, that study has been done. It's been done at least 10 years ago. I know the results. It's 78% better than the standard of care, which is Lyrica. And that's what we'll get into, the deep state, big pharma, big farming, and get into your natural approach to this whole thing. And I said to Dr. Dellon, probably 20 years ago, I said, Dr. Dellon, I think there's more to your theory. My theory, not my hypothesis was, if the carpal tunnel at the wrist works by surgically decompressing nerves, and the elbow and the legs, wouldn't it be true that every nerve throughout the body would have the same biochemical response to sugar? He said, why don't you figure it out? He wasn't happy about that, by the way, because he's written so many articles on his theory. And he says, you figure it out. So I got lucky. I was looking through the literature, and I came across a paper in journal Circulation about 2004. And it was called the Uber marker. And I really didn't think of anything but that word, because that was new to me in 2004, Uber, meaning the answer to everything. Written by Dr. John Cook at Stanford. And that's Cook with an E. With your audience, you probably like to read that article. He was talking about asymmetric dimethyl arginine. That's a big word, but I think you're in the nutrition business, right? Essentially. So
Yes, I'm familiar with arginine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a very common amino acid, semi-essential. That's an interesting word too. What do you mean not essential, but semi-essential? Well, it's kind of it. This is me speaking now. Okay. Now, I read the article, Dr. Cook. I text him and I said, I think your theory fits nicely with Dr. Dellon's theory. And he called me on the phone like 2 hours later. Love your theory. Come up to Stanford. Let's work together, which I did. I used my patients with his molecule, and I came up with the observation, I'm using that word, that my patients who had diabetic polyneuropathy in the legs also had many other neuropathies throughout the body, such as MS, multiple sclerosis. So let's start with that nerve. That's the vagus nerve, essentially. It affects more than one nerve, but essentially. Mm-hmm. And I went back through the literature, and Charcot first observed that in the 1800s in France. And he said, well, look at these white spots on the brain, the cervical spine. He never said what's causing them. He just described what he saw, and that became known as multiple sclerosis, white spots that are hardened. Mm-hmm. That's not a diagnosis. That's an observation. Mm-hmm. And that I started to think about and said, oh my God, all this, what's the word should I use? All this stuff that I learned is just nonsense. Well, I don't know if it's nonsense. Good way to start, but let's go back to 1865. A lot of discoveries were made at that time. So we had diseases such as Charcot-Marie tooth, which is a genetic disease, which I'm not sure is a genetic disease, may really be a epigenetic disease. And we'll talk about that as well. But there were a lot of people looking at these nerves back then, and they were making observations like Verkel, and he was looking at arteries. He was a physiologist. He opened an artery and looked at it, and he looked at the actual word he used was, what is this gunk in the artery at autopsy? And he spoke 5 languages, one of which was Greek, and he named that athro, meaning gunk, sclerosis, meaning hardened gunk. Now, again, is that a diagnosis? I don't think so. I mean, your arteries are plugged up, your pipes are plugged up. You're just describing what you saw. The real question is, what's causing it? And number 2, how do you get rid of it? Now let's get deep into your field of nutrition with that basis. I believe that every one of these neurodegenerative diseases, from autism to Alzheimer's and everything in between, is the same thing. Now, this is where I get the pushback. Well, Dr. Jacoby, they always start with that high pitch. Well, that's their expertise. So I come up against these guys all the time, and gals. And I say, I think I just stepped on your nerve because you're the world's leading authority on that nerve. And you didn't come up with my theory, so you want to put it down. Although they always say, I like your theory, except for my nerve, like Bell's palsy, which is seventh cranial nerve. And there's a fellow, and he's a brilliant guy. I'm not trying to put it down. His name is Shai Rosen out of Israel, is at University of Texas. And his expertise is animation surgery of the face. I went, do you work for Disney? No, he treats Bell's palsy. So Bell's palsy, when that's the seventh cranial nerve of the face and it droops, and he does that surgery to correct that for stroke and Bell's palsy, all sorts of things. And he's listening to my lecture, and we were on the same podium. He said, oh, I really like your theory. It makes a lot of sense. I said, yeah, it'll apply to your nerve as well. Oh, no, well, you don't understand. This is, oh, here we go. So that's why I think this has never been solved. Big Pharma is the one that puts up the money to do the research, and they want a drug at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. And it makes sense. Why would you put up $1 billion if you don't expect a return? That's called a business. But that's why it's never been solved. So I'm looking at like Alzheimer's. That disease never, ever existed before. In the early 1900s, Dr. Alzheimer, again, an observation. And he noticed patients, he lost their memory. Well, now it's the number one cause of death in the older age group. What's causing it? And I talked to all these different scientists. I said, is it meteorites? It could be. But I think it's something very simple, something in the diet. And that something simple is sugar. And specifically, it's high fructose corn syrup, in my opinion. How it's made, genetically modified. I worked with Dr. Stephanie Seneff. I don't know if you know her. She wrote Toxic Legacy, and she taught me the biochemistry of the microbiome and dysbiosis and all that sort of thing. And so I have a good background of talking to the top scientists. It's all there. It's sugar. It's that simple. So I don't want to lecture to your public. So jump in and
no, this is great.
Your,
this is great.
Yeah.
So we started off talking a little bit about diabetes, which a lot of people listening know that one for sure. They're like, oh yeah, excess sugar, excess carbohydrates, that leads to insulin resistance, that leads to diabetes. We get that. But then you're saying all diseases, all chronic illnesses can be linked back to sugar. And so I know you understand that sugar is causing a lot of inflammation. That's a part of this. So can you explain more of that process? Like, how is sugar causing this inflammation? What is it really doing inside of the body?
That's the fundamental question, and it gets deep into the biochemistry. But let me kind of start with a simple thing as table sugar. And I won't go through the whole history of sugar, which is interesting, how it got here and why we're eating it. Well, number one, it tastes great. But here's the trick, the magic act. Glucose, which is causing most of the damage, is disgusting to taste. I don't know if you know that. I don't think anybody knows that, or they know it and they forgot about it. So let's take that little packet of sugar, table sugar, and you put it on whatever you want to put it on, and it tastes delicious because it's sweet. That's what people want. Well, that's a disaccharide. This is the magic trick. Fructose, which is sweet, is linked to glucose, which is not sweet. And when you eat it, you can't tell the difference. As soon as it hits your mouth, then it breaks down by an enzyme, and the glucose goes into your system. And immediately insulin says, whoa, we're under attack, because you can't process more than 1 teaspoon of sugar at a time. It's toxic. It's a poison. And so I'm going to just stop at that point here, and then I'll go deeper into that. Well, what do you mean it's a poison? Everybody knows we need glucose to stay alive. True. That's called gluconeogenesis. You get it from meat and fat, and it comes in small doses, and that's how your brain functions with glucose. But we're feeding it a disaccharide, sucrose is what it's called. And now we have that debate of sugar is sugar. And when I was training, this is a long time ago, I remember that debate. And a friend of mine who is a pediatrician, by the way, and when my kids were young, we discussed that concept. Is a sugar just a sugar? Well, at that time, I didn't know. He didn't know. He thought it was, sugars doesn't matter. I thought it was separate and distinct. And here's the answer to that question. So let's go back to sucrose. So it breaks down to fructose and glucose. Glucose is not a tasty thing to eat. So you wouldn't eat it normally, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you would eat fructose in the natural setting because in the springtime, there's fruit, it gets ripe, you eat it. And you do want to put some fat on your body because you just came through the winter. That's what bears do. They eat tons of fruit to get fat. And if you want to get fat, eat sugar. If you don't want to get fat, eat fat. And so that's what a bear does. And then you see the bear is out there eating fish.
Mm-hmm.
So the fructose, which was touted through the FDA as not raising your insulin. That's what they said. It doesn't raise your insulin. They're absolutely correct. It doesn't. It goes through the liver. So is that a trick, a fraud, a misconception? I'll leave the audience to answer that one. But I looked at it. I'm not a chemist. I mean, I took a lot of biochemistry, but I'm not a chemist. I'm a surgeon. So then I said to myself, well, why is that not exposed? So let's take the path of fructose through the system. So it goes to the liver and it overloads the liver. And that's why 50% of Americans right now have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, because the fructose turns immediately into triglycerides and is trying to be stored as glucagon. And it gets overflows there, then it goes to the arteries, it's making that gunk, that atherosclerosis, because it's inflaming the lining of the blood vessel called the endothelium. So let's segue over to a little sidebar with Dr. Cook at Stanford. Now, John is the world's leading authority on this subject. So the first question I asked him, he's written 700 papers, and I'm lazy when it's fundamentally. So I read a lot of his papers, but I didn't read all 700. So I said to him, and I didn't want to upset him because he invited me to Stanford to discuss this. The first question I asked him, I said, John, can I call you John, I guess? John, would you explain to me this whole cholesterol hypothesis? Now, I knew the answer I wanted to hear, and he answered that this way. He said, the lining of the blood vessels, called the endothelium, is about one cell thick. It's very thin. And that surface is like Velcro, or excuse me, like Teflon in its normal state. When you eat sugar, it causes inflammation of that thin membrane, and it makes it like Velcro. So the signaling molecule, which is cholesterol, comes out of the liver in the bloodstream and goes there and puts that plaque down, which Vercal back in the 1800s said, wonder what this gunk is. And by the way, I went back and reread that paper a couple months ago. You see how excited my life is? And I looked at it, he actually did say he thought it was inflammation. He just didn't know where it was coming from. It was 1865. And sugar was being used in more and more capacity, but not like it is today. 1974, high fructose corn syrup, invented by the Japanese, made into a liquid form, now encompasses 85% of all the food in the United States and 98% of all meat, because the cows are eating corn, carbohydrates, and it's made into high fructose corn syrup. Is that why you left Arizona and went to Spain?
I am not as scared to eat the food out here. That's for sure. I actually had a steak today and it was amazing.
So tell your audience, because I think unless you do what you're doing to see how you feel and look at people and converse with people and really eat with people, you really don't see that. So I would like to hear your did you just get to Spain recently?
I did, but I've traveled a lot. What's your question? You want to know about the differences of food or
Yes, difference of food, your attitude, how you
mm,
feel, what you eat, and what's the difference between the United States and those type of countries.
yeah, so I lived in Costa Rica for about 3 months a couple years ago. I've been there many times. This is my first time in Spain, but and I've been to other countries, but um one thing that I do know is that food is definitely less processed. Like I have someone who works for my company in Armenia, and she actually came to visit me in the United States back in November of last year. And she told me immediately she could taste the preservatives and the chemicals in our food because she couldn't stop eating it. She was eating and eating and eating, and then she felt really sick. And she was like, I cannot believe I've never been able to stop eating like this in Armenia. But in the US, everything she could taste like the additives that make us in America want to eat more of that food. So that's one thing. I think another important factor is the cultural community aspect and the slower lifestyle. So people here in Spain, they don't get up super, super early. They kind of stay out a little bit later, but it's a very lazy day. Like they're working, but they're taking an hour break to spend time with friends. They take many hours sometimes to eat their meals. And do that over conversation and chew their food really well and then digest it. And there's an aspect of connection and community that's important for your health too. And not being so fast paced like we are in America. And there's definitely less chemicals that are used in Europe. The European Union bans a lot more stuff in beauty care products, self-care products, food, everything that you can think of. It's much more restricted here in Europe rather than the United States.
Okay, let's take your observations, which are good ones. And I've been to Costa Rica as well. And we actually went and stayed on a farm in,
I've done that too.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was a dairy farm. And let's start with that, because that's, I think, the fundamental change that I saw from. That's what makes these podcasts so interesting, because everybody has a different view, and then you get a chance to discuss it. I mean,
Hmm.
global warming, all these things are all interconnected
Yeah.
without shouting and screaming. Um, so I'm in Costa Rica, stayed at a dairy farm. My kids were younger, and these cows, and I didn't grow up on the farm. I grew up in Philadelphia and urban environment, but I'm looking at these cows, and I never realized what contentment meant when I looked at their faces, which is,
Mm.
did you have that experience in Costa Rica? Do you see a cow up close?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of wild animals all over the place. The chickens, if you even just look at eggs, the eggs everywhere in every country are so beautiful. The yolk is so dark and rich, and the eggs are bigger, and it's because they're just normal free range hens and chickens going around the everywhere.
They're happy. They're happy.
Yeah.
And so this cow in Costa Rica, I'm looking at her or him, yeah, her, and she's chewing away, ruminating, as the term is, and because that's her job in life, is to take grass, ruminate it, process it into omega-3 fatty acid. That's
Mhm.
her job. She's very happy to do it. She was in this field of grass, and it was amazing. It was a regenerative type of farm, so I think there were maybe 6 different divisions. So this was like a wheel. Grass was like maybe 5 foot high, and then they would eat that down to its stub. The birds would fly in. There were worms. It was crazy. And then next day they would go to the next quadrant, so to speak, and then they would get milked, which they were happy to do, which also surprised me, because they felt very productive, I guess. So my wife at the time said, and she's from Iowa, and she milked the cow, and we drank the milk unpasteurized. Oh my
Mhm.
God. It was, I mean, it's fat. It's it's delicious.
Mm-hmm.
So the animals were content, the people are content, and they are not eating, I like to say, fiat food, fake food. They're eating real food. Now, but I did notice in Costa Rica as well, they have sugar cane. So a lot of people are overweight there as well as here because they have the natural food, but they like the American approach, fast food, and they get just as fat, just as quick, no matter where they live, because they want the Western food. So I had that same experience in Taiwan. I was asked by the Surgeon General in 1981 to go there to figure out why they had diabetes. Dr. Luke Chu is his name. And I spent on and off several years. The first question I asked him, I said, what's the Mandarin word for diabetes? And he said, diabetes. I said, no, what's your word? Well, we use diabetes, which really is a Greek word again, meaning to siphon off sweet urine. That's what the word really means, diabetes mellitus, sweet urine. So that's, I'm glad I'm not a doctor in those days, but what they used to do is just taste the urine and sweet, then you have diabetes. Or they looked at the ground and bees were swarming around the urine. You had diabetes. That's what it means. Now, they had the simple answer. Don't eat carbohydrates. Yeah, but I love carbohydrates. Wheat, oats, all that stuff. And it's cheap. And you'll get fat and you'll get sick. And here we are today. Everybody's sick. Everybody's fat. And we have a huge pharmaceutical industries that, and this is the sentence I use, and I'm in that industry, so I get attacked daily. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. And I get attacked daily. So I'm not against pharmaceuticals. I just want to explain to you why you're taking them. There's not a drug out there for that disease or any disease that is allowing you to eat more sugar. Otherwise, you would die. The glucose, it's toxic. So you have to have a drug to counteract the effects of what you're doing. Well, let's take like Humira. That's for rheumatoid arthritis.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's caused by sugar, inflammation. So that we get into the epigenetics of that. So we all have the same genes, the genome, but we also have epigenetic genes as well. So let's say you have 2 genes would express for rheumatoid arthritis, and I got 10. I eat sugar, I'm going to have stiffness of the joint, and they're going to get destroyed, the synovium, you're going to have all these white cells attack, blah, blah, blah. So they'll give me a drug called a monoclonal antibody, which means the pharmaceutical company is going to take the serum of people who have that symptom, inject mice, collect the antibodies, make it synthetically, give it back to you. It's called a monoclonal antibody, and it costs about $180,000 a year per patient, only to allow you to eat the crap that's causing the problem. That's a good business. And that's exactly what's going on, which is fine if you have your government paying for it and somebody else paying for it, maybe. But US is broke. It's broke. And it's going to all go down the tubes. And we're not going to be able to afford that anyway. So you're in Spain. And I haven't been to Spain, although my daughter went to school in Spain, by the way.
Oh,
because
amazing.
she was a philosophy major. And she had a minor in Spanish. So, Dad, can I go to Spain? Of course. And she went to Ecuador. And of course, she's in real estate now. Yeah. Philosophy, Spanish, how it follows. But she loves Spain, Barcelona in particular. So she made those observations. She's very pure diet now. She's an amazing person. Kind of reminds me of you, as a matter of fact. She went to Costa Rica by herself, backpacking, and she went to Spain, and she's been all over the place. And she's an amazing person. So I've never been to Spain, but I've been to Italy, and I noticed the same thing. I could eat all day long. and not get fat. So let's go back to your friend who came to America
Mm-hmm.
and back to the fructose, why that is so. So you're loading yourself up because you can't stop eating the fructose. And the reason is because fructose interferes with the hormone leptin. Leptin is the switch that says you're full, but it turns off that switch, so you can't stop eating. It's like the Thanksgiving dinner that I always talk about that we have in America here. And I used to do this, and we'd have this huge meal, and everybody has Aunt Bessie or whatever she's called. She makes that mincemeat pie, or something that's terrible.
Yeah.
And I'm stuffed, and I'm watching the football game, and she says, "Oh, you got to have a piece of pie." I said, "I can't. I'm so stuffed, I can't have another bite." "Oh, yes, you can." "Okay, bring it." And she does, and puts ice cream on it. And I was actually able to eat it, although I was stuffed, because that leptin switch was turned off. We need a high fat diet, you say, and you've had this experience, and your friend has this experience. She had that experience coming to America because that switch was turned off. She couldn't stop eating, not
Mm-hmm.
because it was good, because that switch was turned off. So when you eat fat, which I do, I try to be as carnivore as I can, and then I'm actually missing a lot of meals and a lot of friends because they're all out eating. I'm going, I'm not hungry. I'm satisfied. I just feel good, and eating sugar would make me feel bad. Not because I don't like the taste of it. I did. I was a sugarholic like everybody else. But I had that serenity or whatever. I'm like Bessie the cow, ruminating over the food. And I just had an experience with that. And this fellow and his wife are well-known writers in this field, and they were having dinner, and I had eaten breakfast, and they said, "What do you want?" I said, "Actually, I don't need anything. I didn't want anything." And everybody kind of, "Oh, well, eat some of mine." No, I don't, because I know as soon as I start eating, then I'm going to have that experience that I'm going to eat more. So I felt great. So you guys go ahead and eat your meal. So we get into that fasting concept. And people ask me, "What do you fast?" No, I don't. I eat when I want to. And sometimes I look back, oh, it must have been a fast because it was 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
So eat fat, get skinny, eat sugar, get fat. Pretty simple.
So I think for most people listening, hearing glucose and fructose, and then when you look at the back of a package, there's a whole bunch of there's hundreds of different names of hidden sugars, and then there's sugars in fruits, but then there's different sugars in packaged foods. So is there a way you can simplify, like, is it literally every form of sugar for people listening, whether it's packaged or in fruit, or are there things that people need to look out for specifically?
Yes. So there are a lot of sugars: galactose, fructose, mannose, maltose. Anything that ends in OSE is a sugar, or OL in that is a alcohol sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. None of that. Now, do we eat it? Of course we do. So how do you read the label? That was that was like the Da Vinci Code. How do you decipher that? So here's how I did it. So I looked at it and I said, okay, no added sugars. Well, let's say that room you're sitting in was a box and it was all sugar. And somebody put a teaspoon of sugar on top of the box that you're sitting in. And they said, well, we have 1 teaspoon of added sugar. Oh, that's not a lot. Well, it's 100% sugar because you're inside it. So that's a deception. So how do you really read the label? And here's how I do it. I don't even look at all that stuff. Half the words I can't pronounce anyway. So I look for the total carbohydrates in grams. So let's say it's yogurt. I used to eat that thinking it was healthy. Well, yogurt is healthy, but not what I was eating. The blueberry jelly in the bottom, that I love that stuff. And so you look at the total carbs in yogurt, and it says 24. You divide 4 into 24 and you get 6. That's 6 teaspoons of sugar. 6. Well, according to the American Diabetes Association, you shouldn't eat more than 6 teaspoons of sugar in a day. Well, you just did it with a little yogurt. So I try to eliminate sugar entirely and eat fat when I feel like eating. So eggs, as you mentioned, that's rich fat, cholesterol. Oh, that's right. That causes heart disease, doesn't it? Yeah, I forgot about that. The food pyramid. Am I getting off the narrative? Yes, I am. That's the biggest fraud of all time. So I didn't answer your question totally on the biochemistry of sugar. So this gets a little deep, but that's what I learned from Dr. Dallin. Number one, it's like number one, sugar. Sugar plus a protein equals nerve compression, because sugar plus a protein, collagen, will go through a biochemical reaction. It's called the Maillard reaction. Well, you're in Spain. You're close to France, and you would really say Maillard. But I'm from Philadelphia. I can't do that. So it's a Maillard reaction, chemical reaction, causing the nerve the covering on the nerve to contract. Number one. Number two, the polyol pathway, chemical pathway. Sugar inside a nerve converts down to a sorbitol, which is an alcohol sugar, which is hydrophilic, meaning it's going to pull water into the nerve. And it's going to swell the nerve. So if you have tunnel, like carpal tunnel at the wrist, and is this just video on your, or is this video? Audio or both?
It's both.
Okay, so let's use your hand, because I have the phone in my hand.
My hand?
Okay, so
am I making
let me have the inside of your wrist where carpal tunnel would occur. Okay, right there. Okay, that's your fingers right on it, a little bit in the middle, and that's the artery, nerve, and vein. Now press that area, okay, and if you pressed it long enough, you would be, oh, there we go. You would cause compression by a biochemical reaction. At the same time as that nerve, artery, and vein are going through that tunnel, the nerve is swelling, meaning getting bigger. So if you have a covering that's contracting and a nerve that's swelling, I call that, or Dr. Dallin calls that, nerve compression. So the big fatty part or meaty part of your hand, or your thumb, that innervates that muscle and somewhat of your second finger, and that function is to grip like that. That's what it's used for. That's its function. That's the nerve. Sugar's causing that, and you get numbness, tingling, burning, and then eventually you get loss of function, and that's it. You can't grip.
Right.
So if I handed you a $100 bill with Benjamin Franklin's face on it, you wouldn't be able to grab it. So I call that the Benny effect. Okay, so you've lost your sense of grip. So let's use that same concept for, let's say, the topical thing today is Robert Kennedy, his dysphonia due to his dystonia of his larynx. Have you been following that conversation? Robert Kennedy.
I heard him on a podcast or something, or I could hear it.
Yes.
In his voice.
So that is called dysphonia, and the condition is called dystonia. So in a sense, carpal tunnel of the wrist is a dystonia because the nerve is being compressed by sugar, and eventually the muscle is not working. Now it doesn't happen over it doesn't happen. I'm getting calls coming here, messing up with our podcast here. And so what happens is it compresses the nerve, the laryngeal nerve in the neck that supplies the voice box. So let's use the same analogy of carpal tunnel to Robert Kennedy's dysphonia. So this is for gripping. So we have a nerve that operates a muscle, and that nerve is called the laryngeal nerve. And that muscle's function is to vibrate sound or air to produce sound. So isn't that the same thing? But we call it dystonia of the larynx. So in diabetes of the leg, we call it diabetic polyneuropathy. Same process. It goes from small fiber, that's too deep for you with this show, but I mean, it goes through a process of affecting the smallest nerves first, which we call small fiber neuropathy, until it finally shuts off the blood supply totally to that nerve, which operates that muscle. And in the lower extremity, that's dangerous because it then causes loss of feeling, loss of sensation, a blister, infection, osteomyelitis, gangrene, and then finally amputation. But all the other diseases, and Sandra Bullock, husband, just recently in the news yesterday, died of ALS. Mm-hmm. That's the nerve next to that one, the glossopharyngeal nerve. Same thing. What's the function of the glossopharyngeal nerve? To swallow. Yeah. If you can't swallow, it goes in your lungs. You can't breathe, and you die. He did yesterday. 3-year process. I don't know his diet. I looked at his picture. He actually looked pretty healthy. But my theory is trauma plus sugar equals nerve dysfunction. So let's talk about trauma. Obviously, in the foot is simple. It's, lots of trauma. But back to ALS, what's that word mean? See, people just roll the name off and, I know what that is. No, you don't. A means in Latin, no. Lateral is the nerve on either side of the neck. Amyotrophic, there we are with that muscle in your hand with carpal tunnel. Amyotrophic, meaning the muscle doesn't work. Lateral on either side. Sclerosis. Dr. Burkal, 1865. You use that word, and they're using it today. It means hardening of the nerve and the muscle. It's not a diagnosis. It's a observation of the nerve that is not working. The real question is, why is that nerve not working? Epigenetics, trauma, sugar. That's the answer, in my opinion. Now, has anybody agreed with me? Not a lot of people. But I don't see a concept that defutes it either.
Yeah. Are you saying, because I totally agree with this. So are you saying like trauma that we all have throughout our lives and that causes dysfunction of the nervous system, right? So it's could be hyperactive and more of like a sympathetic state, or there's something going on where the nervous system is just not functioning properly because of that trauma, because of the state that it puts the body in, paired with diet and then you mentioned epigenetics. So other lifestyle choices that we're making that's triggering genetic predispositions. Is that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Amazing.
Okay. So let me give you just a little sidebar story to the epigenetics. A guy by the name of Saint Hilaire. He had a long name. Geoffrey Etienne Saint Hilaire, 1794, roughly. So he was at the Battle of Nile, long story short, got marooned there for 3 years, and he sat around thinking about what you just said. And he took eggs, and he injected the eggs with different things. I don't know exactly what he injected them with. This is 1794. He wanted to see if the environment would change the progeny, the egg, if the environment was changed. And he had a whole bunch of eggs and he did different things to them. And sure enough, it did. That's epigenetics. 1794, Bruce Lipton now, he's the biggest guy on epigenetics. He started talking about it in the 1960s. He thinks he discovered. No, he didn't. It was my buddy saying hello. What I'm saying is the science is known. The science is being slow walked. So the cure, and that's where we'll morph over this really another podcast with you on stem cells. And stem cells really fix everything. And it's a naturally occurring substance, but it's a complicated one. And that's what my new book is about. How we got the itis in the first place, and how do we get rid of the itis in this environment, and that is stem cells. That's why I call it unglued. Now, you're in nutrition. I did not know this answer, so I'm going to put you on the spot. What does the word glucose mean? Where did it come from?
Oh, where does it come from?
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
I don't, I
your
don't,
face looks just like mine.
I don't know,
I
like
didn't
the
know.
background of it necessarily.
Well, I read a book called Sugar Crush, and I'm getting that same question
And
last year. I
it's
was
a
dumbfounded.
monosaccharide.
That's what I said. Okay,
Yeah.
I went to the most difficult. No, and this guy, it was kind of like a think tank in Hollywood, very, very Hollywood kind of thing. They kept saying it. No, what's the word mean? I went, I don't know. But you wrote a book on it. Yeah, never go past the word you don't understand. Well, I did. Okay, open the dictionary. It's a Greek word. It means adhesive, sticky. It's glue, glucose. OSE is the suffix that is all the sugars. That's a type of glue. And if you eat enough glue, you're going to glue up your nervous system and you're not going to function. It's that simple. But I put you on the spot and I wanted to see your face, how you were like searching. I looked exactly like you did. And I'm going, wait a minute, I don't know what the word means. And I'm talking about it. Then I realized I was using a lot of words I really didn't have any depth of knowledge, although I could roll off ALS, blah, blah, blah. I could do the biochemistry like I knew what I was, well, I did know what I was talking about, but it had no connection to anything. And that's what we got going on in the United States. When you sound really intelligent like that, well, here's $10 million. Go see if you can figure out a drug to quote unquote cure this disease, like Mitt Romney. He ran for president as well. And I think it's 2 T's, Mitt. I don't know why that is. But anyway, I was on a talk show and Mrs. Romney was on the show. And I was in the green room, so I didn't hear what she said. She came out and she's very nice. And I said to her, I said, Mrs. Romney, how you doing with your MS? And I hope you're not eating sugar. She looked at me like I was stalking her. I said, well, no, I just, giving that comment. So I got on the show, I did my thing, and then I went and looked at her tape. Guess what she was expounding on? She has MS, multiple sclerosis. She was expounding on the glorification in her cookbook of sugar. So when, the first day of school for the kid, and you got the apple pie, and you got the coffee next to it, and the school bus. Next one is the, hot dog at 4th of July, and all the kids are, eating sodas and what, it's a celebration of sugar around social events, birthdays, Christmas, Halloween, all this stuff. Of course we're addicted. But she didn't get it. So her husband donated $300 million to Boston University for the cure. No, he didn't. There's no cure. I don't care if it was $300 billion. They're looking for a drug that they can monetize, that you can continue eat that sugar and not and treat the symptoms of the MS that you're going to get. That's That's not a cure. That's a cruel joke. So it's all the same. But I do think there's a solution with stem cells. In Europe, they're kind of against stem cells. I'm not sure why. US certainly against embryonic stem cells, the fetus, and I understand that's ethics. But non-embryonic stem cells is used very effectively, by the way, and I shouldn't say was, but is used in Costa Rica. That's where Dr. Riordan, who is originally from Scottsdale, by the way, and I did not know that, and I knew his partner. He left the United States to pursue this cure and is now in Panama, and that's the most famous clinic. I've been there. He treats MS, autism, and lots of other inflammatory neurologic diseases. It works. I'll give you, I don't know how much time we have. You may have to break this up into 5 parts. But I think if you have an audience with younger demographics, mainly female or predominantly female, they're going to be very interested in these 2 things. I'll tell you without getting too boring. Autism and the microbiome and the love bug. Do you know what the love bug is?
No.
Okay, so I'll go in. I'll give you a taste of that. Maybe we'll do this at another time. But autism is, when I first started studying this 25 years ago in this subject, autism was 16 births per 16,000, or excuse me, 16 births per 10,000. Today, the number is 1 in 20. 1 in 20 births have autistic spectrum disorders. Oh, I know it's better diagnosed. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It is I want to say pandemic, but it's not really a pandemic because the prevalence in Spain and Italy is not that high, but the US it is. And the answer is sugar. And it's a national disgrace. And it's a preconception problem. So I won't go into the details of that, but it affects another nerve called the hypoglossal nerve, which affects the tongue, delayed speech. Mm-hmm. So that's the connection to autism. But here, I'll end it for you. Otherwise, your audience will drift off into a post-sugar euphoria. The love bug. So the love bug's real name is Lactobacillus reuteri. Okay, so he's living in your small intestine, and he's having a happy time if you feed him sugar, because that's what he likes. So, but you really should feed him fat. So Lactobacillus reuteri is called the love bug because he produces, I don't know if it's a he or she. We'll have to think of it. That's probably a neutral. So I had a cat that it was both genders. My wife had it. So we know what to call it. So we called Shim. He and she. So we're called the bug Shim.
Okay, I like that.
And you like that one? So I don't want to be, controversial in how this world is. So Shim, called Lactobacillus reuteri, produces a chemical called oxytocin. Oxytocin is that hormone when a woman is pregnant that relaxes her, gives her that glow and serenity. And it actually does relax because it relaxes the ligaments, because at childbirth, the birth canal has to be relaxed. Otherwise, you would die. So it's a very important chemical. Well, we get it from our food. Women know that. Women know pregnant women, they feel that. Well, men have it as well. So, but our levels are probably pretty low. So that's what I say. If a male's oxytocin levels are low, he will not want to go shopping with you after you have sex. But he will go shopping with you if by food you raise his oxytocin levels. He'll actually want to go shopping, which he normally would not do. So I'm using that facetiously, but it's a mood change. It's a relationship change. Food has a lot to do with how we think and feel. And I think that's part of the disconnect with conversation. And food is altering that connection. And the answer is Lactobacillus reuteri. And if you want to really, a great book on that is Super Gut by Dr. William Davis. You can get much more detail than I just said. But the sugar is very important for just about every transaction.
Well,
So,
sugar also, when you're just eating a lot of processed foods, sugar, a lot of carbohydrates, then you do see, I look at gut tests all day long. So you
uh-huh.
definitely see these healthier bacteria that we want, like you said, the Lactobacillus reuteri, and all these other healthy bacteria start to decrease, or maybe we have other bad bacteria that could cause problems increase. Maybe you
Oh,
have
yes.
yeast start to overgrow because yeast loves
Yes.
sugar. Then we have this whole different scenario that starts to happen that we probably didn't have many, many years ago. Like you said, before sugar was ever introduced, probably never had yeast problems.
Well, you're absolutely correct. So there's a condition called SIFO, SIFO, small intestinal, why do they call it F? Overgrowth. So it must be
Not SIBO.
fungal, fungal,
Oh,
fungal
fungal. Yeah.
overgrowth.
Small
And the
intestinal.
opposite for the bacteria is SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So yes, both can overgrow in the small intestine, which is not supposed to have any of these organisms. But when we eat a lot of sugar, the this is, I mean, this is a whole other lecture, but the alimentary canal, so the small intestine is about 24 feet long. It's quite long in composed to the, or as opposed to the large intestine, which is very short. And that's where the feces is stored before it's evacuated. So if that migrates up through the small intestine, you're going to get SIBO or CFO, and that's going to alter your absorption of nutrients and change your mood and cause all these quote unquote autoimmune diseases, which I think is a misnomer. It causes inflammation in different tissues epigenetically. The white cells come out. You got a fight in your skin. We call it psoriasis. You have this fight, on a nerve. You get this disease. I think it's all the same. Body would never attack itself. That's nonsense. The white cells are there to attack, but the battle scar is the effect, like MS, multiple areas of sclerosis. So that's how I look at the disease. But it actually doesn't matter, because my next book, Unglued, now you know what the word means. How do you get unglued? Answer: stem cells. And that is a huge subject. And and I'm hate to say that, but sometimes these podcasts get eliminated from Google because I use those words, because I'm telling the truth.
I know we talk about everything on this podcast, so I don't know if anything's been taken down yet, but um yeah, we'll definitely have people check out that new book that's coming out, and I'll have to look up the Stem Cell Institute in Panama, because I am familiar with Neil Riordan, because he actually founded one of the centers at the naturopathic school in Arizona. I don't know if you are aware of that, but there's the
Oh,
Neil
yes,
Riordan Center
absolutely.
there. Yeah.
Are
So
you a
that's
naturopath?
I'm not. I did go to that school for a little bit and I did some research with them. It was during COVID. It was just a really crazy time, but no, I'm a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner.
Ah, okay. So
Yeah.
yeah, Neil Reardon. I did not know this, but his partner is, was Dan Rubin. Do you know him? He's a naturopathic physician and a friend of mine, and he was in my office the other couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about that. And I said, "Are you doing stem cells?" And he said, "No." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, I don't really know a lot about that." Well, I said, "I saw you on a podcast with Neil Reardon. He's the father of stem cells, basically." And he
Mm-hmm.
said, yeah, but he was his partner, literally across the street from where I practice in Scottsdale. I knew Dan, but I didn't know Neil. Now I know Neil. I've seen him at many meetings. I've been to Panama multiple times. And so I know that subject, and I have some really, I think, interesting insights into that whole world. They do work, and Big Pharma does not want this to get out because it will destroy the pharmaceutical industry and
Yeah.
return health to the public. Oh, what a scenario, huh?
Right. I'm
Wow.
sh I'm sure we could talk forever and ever about everything. I know we're over on time, but do you have like 5 more minutes?
I'm sorry. Do I have what?
Do you have 5 more minutes?
Oh yeah, I have much time as you
Oh,
need.
okay. So I want to kind of start to close up the conversation, but give people we talked about many different things today. So if we were to close up maybe the conversation we started up off with about the neuropathy and all of the sugar and all these things starting to affect the nerves and et cetera, you know, you've mentioned multiple times that surgery is an option that people wind up having to go to for amputations and such. Before someone gets to that point, um, what are the first things that they should do or the first steps people should start thinking about to prevent ever getting to that point? Or if they're there also, is there a way to reverse things before they have to go into that surgery?
Yes, absolutely. So here's the problem. So they're going to go to their doctor with migraine headaches in their early 20s. Oh, wait, here's your medicine for that. Well, that's sugar, by the way, causing nerve compression of different nerves in the scalp, um, either the front or the occipital area. And that can be addressed surgically, by the way. But that's the first symptom. So, and it's more prevalent in females than males. I think estrogen has something to do with it. But migraine headaches are a big problem in the female 20-year-old grade. Then other symptoms are popping up. I mean, skin conditions for sure, acne. Um, you mentioned yeast infections for women, very, very prevalent. And then UTIs, urinary tract infections. And not, this is where the function comes in. And the function of the female apparatus is no different than the function of the foot. It's going to subject it to the different pH because of fungus and sugar, and it changes pH. So things are going to grow on the foot like fungus, and the female like fungus, or it alters a bacterial infection, goes up the urethra, and you have a UTI, a urinary tract infection. Then you get what? Antibiotics over and over again. That ruins the microbiome, dysbiosis, and now you're on that track. These are early symptoms. So I say that the clarion sound of pain in the foot is really the most important sound. In other words, my foot hurts. I have diabetic neuropathy. It is painful. And that's the link that you're impending either cardiac arrest, because the same process is happening in your heart, or in your urinary tract. And so these are all what we call prodromal symptoms leading up to the big event. And I always say dead is a bad symptom. It's not reversible, dead, cardiac arrest. But these other symptoms are reversible. So I put them in 5 phases. The first phase, I got a little burning, a little whatever. And that burning and UTIs, whatever you're talking about, is more prevalent. Phase 3, it's constant, and you're getting into a surgical issue, prolapse or uterus, and all that kind of stuff, or approaching diabetic ulcerations and amputations. Phase 4, a lot of people are on these drugs, and like Lyrica for the diabetic neuropathy, and they say, well, I hear it all the time, Dr. Jacoby, this Lyrica is really working. I said, why is that? And he said, I don't feel any pain anymore. Well, let me take a look at your foot. Oh, here's a big ulcer. It smells like gangrene. And we do an MRI, and you're already, it's too late. We got to amputate. But there is a space between phase 3 and phase 5 that stem cells are an excellent alternative or they can be used with the surgery. Now, most of the problem is by the time you see me, you're already well along the path to amputation. I can do certain things if I get them early enough to prevent the amputation. And I do the decompression nerve surgery and stem cells, which I'm not allowed to use that word anymore, by the way. So I didn't use that word. No, I actually used it because you're in Spain. I think you can use it there. Okay. So no Americans listen to that word. And yeah, so listen to your body, look at your diet. Best scientific instrument ever made was called a mirror. Look in the mirror. If you like what you see, keep doing it. If you don't, then change. It's that simple.
Wow. That's a really good last line there. I like that one. Can I do a really fast speed round of questions? So first thing that comes to your mind when I ask the questions, we're just going to do 5 quick ones. Okay. What's one supplement you can't live without?
B12.
Oh, okay. Specific type of B12.
Methylated.
Okay. I like it. Sublingual or pill form?
Sublingual is better.
Okay. What's your favorite thing to do for stress reduction?
Probably go in a sauna.
That's one of my
Infrared.
favorites. Yeah. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
To talk to Robert Kennedy, and I think his message could change the health of America.
Okay. If you could eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh, it would be a steak for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind
Filet.
of
I
steak?
love
A fillet?
fillets.
Okay.
Yeah.
And last one, if you could leave the listeners with one tip that they could implement this week to help them live a healthier, happier life, what would it be?
I think look in the mirror. Like what you see, keep doing what you're doing. If you don't, change.
Yeah, that's a good one. Any final comments, or if you want to share more about the books or links where people can find you, go ahead and share that with the audience.
Well, Unglued is not out yet. Should have been out this month, but of course I have so many new ideas. I kept changing the last 2-3 chapters, which I think the audience will like. You can go to, and we're setting this up right now, to drjacobybook.com at gmail.com. And if you send me your email, I will send out the first chapter of the new book, Unglued. So that'll give you a flavor of what we're talking about.
Okay.
For free. We'll send it to free for your listeners.
Okay. We will do that. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I know there was so much more that we could have gotten into. So maybe we'll have to do a round 2 with you.
Well, what country do you want to do that in? Where are you going next?
It's a really good question. Maybe Portugal, but I don't know for sure yet.
Well, that's on my bucket list. I have a lot of friends who are moving there. They say the food is great, and the weather is great, and it's a very urban, walkable city, Porto and those kind of cities. And yeah, I've never been there either, but that's a country I want to go to.
Okay, so you fly to Porto, because I was going to go to Porto, and then we'll do the podcast there.
That's I'll take you up on that, because that's been on my bucket list, and I just haven't done it. But I do like to go to those countries because it puts me in the mood of what's different with the food. And am I just dreaming this? No, when it's so true, and people have to do it to understand it. And they're not getting the answers in the United States. And it really is a crime. I mean, this is the greatest country ever, and we're the sickest country ever. I'll leave you with this one horrible notation. So as William Davis said, the alimentary canal is becoming fecalized. That's the medical term for fecal moving up the alimentary canal into the small intestine. And does he mean that Americans are now full of shit? I think so. Okay. So I don't know if you want to quote that one, but when you think of it just on a guttural level like that, and you look in the mirror and say, you know what? We are. We think we know the answer and we don't. And if we did, we wouldn't look like what you're looking at. And it's all reversible. And it takes discipline, though. It's not easy. But once you get to that side, you know, the sugar-free lifestyle, it's quite nice. So I'll leave you with that thought.
Good,
all right,
good place to end it.
Porto, Portugal. Here we come.
Porto it is. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like this video and comment, letting me know what you enjoyed and what you want to see more of. Also, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get alerts when new content is coming out and you don't miss any videos. And just a quick reminder that this information is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or medical condition. Please consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your diet, exercise routine, supplements, or medical treatment. If you're looking for a functional medicine practitioner, please reach out to me. And thank you again for watching, and keep striving to become your healthiest, happiest self.